Hi everyone, welcome to the Thoughts for Change Makers LinkedIn Live, where we challenge the status quo, elevate performance, and foster exponential growth. So today I am with Mark Butler. Mark is a mental health expert with over 25 years of experience as a workplace strategist, psychotherapist, and clinical director. So we can tap in into his wisdom. So if you have any questions, pop them into the chat and I will ask them to Mark. But I already have one for you, Mark.
Sure.
What is your definition of team performance? What does it mean for you?
That's an interesting question. You know, let me start by saying what it's not, as far as I'm concerned. Very
I like this
often,
approach.
yeah, very often people will, when they talk about team performance, they're talking about results and outcomes. And in the work I do, I tend to look on team performance as actually the kind of you and me stuff. So, in other words, how a team is performing is going to be based on how they're engaged, connected, whether they feel safe, whether they trust each other or feel trusted, and whether they feel like they belong. When you have that, you have a level of performance that you can expect from a team. But it's a bit
Mm.
like a football team running onto the pitch. The team performance is one thing. The team, the number of goals they score is actually a different thing. But that's often how they're measured is whether they win the game and what the score was. But to my mind, it's not so much the results; it's much more around how they interrelate and interact with each other.
Mm,
So that to me is performance.
yes. And can we go into individual performance?
I
What's
think it's
your
largely
take on that one?
it's how we present and how we perform. Um, what is required of us to produce the results that people are looking for. But our
Mm.
performance is actually the act as opposed to the outcome.
Mm, yeah. So you're what I'm hearing that you are system driven. It's about maybe more what you're doing, being each and every day, rather than maybe during one event, what is the outcome that happened. Um, that
Yeah,
that's like I'm yeah, that's how I interpret it. And
yeah,
of
the
course,
journey rather than the destination, I think.
yes, correct.
Yeah, yeah.
And now
Hmm.
how this idea came up to write up your book that launch, when did it launch?
Up yours, the pursuit of radical self-care. I should give the entire title just in case people think I'm being rude. Look, it was a provocative title. It's about upping our self-care. The radical self-care is about wide-ranging, and from the ground up, if you like. So it's a much broader view. I released the book. I think it came out about February or March this year.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, thereabouts. And so it was based on people upping the level of care that they have for themselves. Far more than just sleep, diet, and exercise. I was looking at much broader holistic sort of measure of what self-care should be. So it talks about burnout, what it is, what it isn't, how we can look out for each other. We talk about resilience and buoyancy and responding positively to adversity, but
Mm,
also then conversations around self-awareness, emotional
mm.
intelligence, self-compassion.
Self-compassion. I saw you are mentioning Dr. Kristen Neff. I love her
Yes,
work on self-compassion.
Kristen F is fabulous. She does excellent work, and I love the message that she delivers. Particularly around how our self-critic uh, talks to ourselves, how we talk to ourselves through our self-critic. I, I
Mm,
I saw some research when I was working on the book that we actually have more conversations with ourselves than all other conversations combined. People might not realize that. And the other thing that's important, you and I are speaking now at about 170 words a minute. Some people can type at, say, 200, 220 words a minute. I can type at about 25. But
You did a bit more anyway in overall
Oh,
for the book.
yeah, an awful typist, and I don't know why I never just kind of put the time in to learn it properly. But anyway, so we type at most people type slightly faster than we can talk,
Mm.
but our self critic talks to us at about 600 words a minute because we don't have to finish sentences because we know what we mean, right? So when we're talking at that sort of a pace, if we're in a full blown panic attack, in fact, the
Mm.
conversation could be anything up to 4,000 words a minute when our mind is absolutely racing. And the other thing that is very noticeable is unless we train ourselves, that self critic generally doesn't have very nice things to say to us about ourselves. Very often we have to train it to be compassionate and train our thought process to be a bit more forgiving than perhaps we
Mm.
tend to be. And that's what Kristen Neff's work is all about. You
Yeah.
know, maybe a way of looking at it is there's depending on who you speak to, but Kristen Neff or Brené Brown or any of the workers around sort of, Travis Bradbury, Daniel Goleman, Amy Edmondson, they all talk about emotional intelligence.
Mm.
Um, and we can experience, I think the greatest number is about 80 different emotions people have kind of come up with. But there's 8 billion of us on the planet. And Kristen Neff's message is when we're feeling whatever we're feeling, if it's overwhelming us and it's sadness or anger or whatever it is, her line about this is there's 8 billion of us, there's 80 emotions. What we're feeling and experiencing is not exclusive to us. It's
Mm.
part of the human existence. It's also
Common humanity.
yeah, it's part of that whole sort of conversation, that whole story. Um, we're all in this together, and we're all experiencing these kind of adverse events from time to time, and to just be
Mm.
gentle and kinder with ourselves.
Yes,
Mm.
we are all imperfect, flawed human beings.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And how boring would life be if we weren't?
And what I like, I think self-compassion, it's really, I think it's one of the notion that is really hard to nail. I
Find it
think it seems like simple, but again, I think in your book you say that, yeah, it's not about indulgence or complacency. And I like, this approach sometimes to define what is something. It's to start by what it is not.
Mm.
But so far, if I can share something to the audience, would be that my understanding of self-compassion, to make it stick for someone,
Yeah.
is what a good friend would tell you in this situation.
Yes, that's lovely. Yeah. Yeah, or what we would say to a good friend.
Or what would
The
be a good
way,
friend.
yeah, the way we speak to ourselves. If we could speak to ourselves the way we would speak to a friend in a similar situation, I think there's a beautiful lesson in that because we don't very
Mm.
often, you know.
Yes.
Mm.
And now, what do you see in the workplace now? Like, how do you see, what are the trends that you can notice in the workplace?
In terms of self-compassion or in terms of
No,
just
sorry, yeah.
mental
Now in terms of more
well-being?
like burnout, like
Sure, sure.
self-care,
Yeah.
like,
Look, I think we're getting better at it. I think when we look at the latest legislation around psychosocial hazards and what we experience there, I think the legislation suggests that bullying seems to be a pretty prominent mental psychosocial hazard that
mm,
people are experiencing. And I think, yes, whilst that's true, I think the
mhm,
measure very often is around what sort of workers' compensation claims are occurring, etc. And that can often be how businesses measure the level of mental ill health in the workplace, uh, certainly pertaining to the new legislation. But I think it's missing something, and burnout is still I suspect, the biggest challenge in the workplace today.
mm,
I say that because if we're looking at workers' compensation claims as our measure of the level of mental ill health in the workplace, people tend to not make claims for burnout. They just leave. So I would say to an organization, look at the level of attrition. Look at how many people you're actually losing and having to replace. Look at the
Mm,
people who have got all of their holiday and sick leave still left. Look at the ones
mm,
who have absolutely none. It's those on
mm,
the extremes are going to tell you more about what's happening in the workplace. The
mm.
other thing, millennials and sort of the earlier generations, I can say that I've got gray hair, so I'm saying earlier generations,
And
right?
I can raise my hand for millennials category.
All right. The generations that are probably younger than us, it seems that they are less inclined to engage in conflict sort of conversations. So if
Mm,
they're unhappy, they tend to not have the conflict conversation.
mhm.
They just leave.
They
So,
sleep, yeah.
so yeah, right. So and avoid that conflict. The flip side of that, I find, and this could be anecdotal, but I find people from those generations are incredibly well mannered and polite. That's my experience, and
Mm,
so civility with other people, particularly when face to face, is a huge tick in their favor. And maybe there's something to do with the two of those. I don't know, but
mm,
people who are, they're less inclined to have the sort of conflict, argumentative sort of conversations when they're unhappy. They tend to just leave. So that might not be a good measure of sort of what's happening in the workplace, because
no,
civility certainly is a challenge.
and can I jump on that?
Sure.
Even if I and again, it's sometimes, we have trends, but um, like having difficult conversations, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's in personal life,
Mm.
it's it's a life skill. It
Yeah.
doesn't need it can't be avoided, because then you're not building the skills moving forward to have those discussion. And it's about friction. And we know we are in a life where we talk about thoughts for change makers.
Yeah.
So if you face a situation that is difficult, where you need to be a bit courageous, or where you feel a discomfort in what the topic will be,
Yeah.
go for it. And there are
Yeah.
strategies to go for it, because that's how you grow. That's how you build resilience. I think you said something about your book as well, about like resilience.
Mm.
And also I read an article even for younger generation. It was more about their personal life. So if they are in a relationship with someone, they won't break up face to face with them. They will send an SMS.
Ooh, okay. I
And
hadn't
I,
heard
I
that one.
find, where is the humanity in not having face-to-face communication anymore? And that
Yeah.
made me think about this, like, okay, there is a difficulty. Okay, I leave.
Hmm.
And
That
like,
is an interesting one, and it kind of probably ties into the same sort of conversation and the same argument. But yes, to have the challenging conversation that, as you say, is necessary for self growth, requires, I think, a clarity for ourselves around what's okay for us and what's not, where my
mm,
stuff ends and your stuff begins. Then we
mm,
start to talk about boundaries and how important a boundary is to us.
mm,
And I have this conversation a lot with organizations and with teams, especially,
mm,
is encouraging and supporting people to establish or declare what is okay for them and what's not, what their boundary is within that team. And my experience is that the only person who will have an issue with you having a boundary around your self care, um, the person that will have an issue with it is somebody who stood to gain by you not having it. So, in other words, somebody who is going to have an advantage by you not having a boundary and
mm,
you not declaring it. And that is that it's a hard thing to do. But interestingly, it's only hard to do until you get used to it. And until your experience is the other person going, oh, okay, I understand, and which is going to be what most responses to people establishing boundaries are, particularly if your boundary is based around your sense of values. So when we're talking about conflict in the workplace, then if I have a value around sort of respect and how I expect to be spoken to and treated, then
Mm,
and as long as I'm clear that that's how I'm going to expect to be spoken to and treated, we can establish a boundary like that, and I won't be spoken to in that way, or don't snap at me. I'm just trying to help. Whatever the conversation is, once we're clear on what that boundary is, you actually find that what it does is it reduces conflict. It doesn't cause it, particularly if people are sort of on the same level and not trying to take advantage.
mm,
Boundaries are a very important
yeah.
element of self-care, but we
And
have there.
do you feel it can be also linked to a trait such as assertiveness? Maybe if like you are not enough assertive, it's going to be very difficult for you to set those boundaries.
Yes. If one lacks assertiveness or sort of self-confidence, yes, that can be much
Mm,
harder, and it takes a bit of practice. Um, if you're a people pleaser,
mm,
it can be very, very hard to sort of get used to the idea of declaring what's okay for me and what's not, because we live in fear of upsetting the other person. And it shouldn't be about them. It's got to be about us. So we have to take
mm,
responsibility for that. So
yes.
it does take a little practice. And I'm not saying, take it out on the Uber driver or the taxi driver or someone like that where you don't have an emotional connection with. You know what I mean? Don't practice setting boundaries with people because you think there is no sort of potential backlash.
Mm,
Because I've seen people try that, and I don't like it. Um, if one wants to get used to practicing boundaries, practice with someone where you feel safe doing so, because
mm,
if they do react, you can still repair the rift without
yes.
causing sort of undue angst with somebody, and they'll
Mm,
understand. So if you're not assertive enough or feel like you have enough self-confidence yet to establish or declare a boundary, think about
mm,
what's important to you, define
mm,
more, and go from there and deliver it to whoever you think needs it.
mm. And I'm just thinking out loud.
Sure.
Can it help if we also say to people, if you don't put those boundaries, what are gonna be the cost for you? And cost can be anything, could be like energy, money, time, or whatever. So, do you think
Happiness, generally.
sometimes
Yeah.
when you feel the pain
Yeah.
and you feel it's really painful, that's maybe where like you say, okay, um, I need to protect that because I know that it can become even more painful in the future.
Generally, I find if we want to think about what the cost of having a boundary is, think about what the cost of not having it is. And if
Mm,
what you stand to lose is greater by not having a boundary, well, then that's the time you need one.
okay.
I think that's the best
Yes. And
analogy.
that's gonna propel people into action.
Yeah, I think so. I think when you look at what you stand to lose rather than what you stand to gain, we often don't understand what we're going to stand to gain by having a boundary because we don't know how it's going to be received. But I say to people, don't worry about how it's going to be received. What's important is how it's going to make you feel in letting people know that you have a limit and you have,
Mm,
there is a way that you will be treated or spoken to or whatever your boundary is around.
mm,
Look, your boundary could be around. I finish work at Tuesdays at 5:30 because I go to the gym. I have an exercise class, and my boundary is that my exercise is really important to me, so I need to be there for that.
mm,
That's a healthy boundary. And
mm,
sometimes somebody might say, "Oh, can you stay back and help us? We've got a deadline." Then you can negotiate around it. But I think in terms of your self-care and in terms of your self-worth and self-value, it's important that people know that gym time on a Tuesday evening is really important to you.
mm. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding us that, because sometimes we can be on autopilot,
Mhm.
and and that is detrimental to us in the long run because
Yeah.
we can.
Well, our self-care goes out the window.
Mm,
We
yes.
burn out.
Yeah, we burn out. And by the way, talking about burnout,
Mhm.
and I think that's something we don't talk enough regarding burnout is the recovery phase.
Yeah.
So what can be the preventive phase, or where can we see the early signals so that we don't go into this rabbit hole and then we burn out, and then because I can see executives that are burning out in my LinkedIn network,
Yep.
and they will come back in the workplace maybe 7 months later or
Yep.
1 year later.
Yeah. Um, Gordon Parker is emerite professor at University of New South Wales. Wrote a fabulous book, and I'm trying to see if I can see it on my bookshelf, because with two other authors, and Gabrielle Taverns, and I cannot remember the third person. That's terrible. I'm so sorry. Gordon Parker and colleagues wrote a fabulous book on burnout, and they speak in the book. The analogy that they use is a candle,
Mm-hmm.
and how you treat a candle that's flickering versus a
Mm-hmm.
candle that's blown out completely, two very different approaches. And it's the same with burnout. While we're burning out and we're still, we're not at the point of sort of total collapse yet,
Mm.
we can recover easier than if we've reached that sort of, end of the line for ourselves. The recovery process there is much longer, obviously.
Mm.
So it's a question of, it's like a spectrum, and the question of where along that sort of burnout journey we are. Um, we're talking about boundaries just a second ago, and I think our burnout can very often be we haven't paid attention to what's important to us, and we didn't have boundaries around our self-care, which is what's kind of allowed it to happen. The other thing I think that's really important about burnout is it's very often, very, very often, the result of suppressing our emotions.
Mm.
Yeah. So if we're not paying attention to what emotional responses we're feeling, frustration, it could be anger, it could be stress, it could be overwhelm, it could be nervousness or anxiety, it could be depression. If we ignore what we're feeling,
Mm.
and we don't have a wide enough emotional range, um,
Mm.
because we're just tapping in. It's all about the work, if you like,
Mm.
and we start to burn out. It's because we've suppressed the natural response to those emotions. Now, people will often say emotions. It's all a bit kind of woo woo, but it's not. My line when I'm talking about emotions.
So we have someone on LinkedIn that is having a reaction and an emotion, I
Hey,
guess. Guess what? As human, we do have emotions. We are not
uh,
AI. We are not robots, right?
yeah,
So
exactly right.
yes.
And in fact, I'd go so far as to say the thinking part of our brain is the last place to know what's actually going on for us or for our environment. And now that sounds like a throwaway line, but in actual fact, it's not. Because what's happening is every action or every behavior that we've got is underpinned by a feeling, right? So the action is in response to a feeling or an emotion, same thing. That feeling is in response to a need that we have that must be met, and it's a need for us internally or a need we have for our environment. You know, um, I haven't eaten, so therefore, I'm hungry.
Mm.
When I'm hungry, I get a bit sort of agitated and a bit cranky,
Mm.
and then I sort of lash out at somebody, or I go shopping when I'm hungry, and then I come home from shopping and I look at I've got 3 bags of chocolate and absolutely none of the
Yes.
essentials. Right? We've all been there. We've all done it.
Yes.
But so what's happening is we have a need or a want from our environment for ourselves. It creates an emotion or a feeling or a response of some kind, and then we take action based on that. So it's a bit like the kind of fight or flight response We have the visual, the sort of visceral body response long before we've actually worked out what's going on for ourselves.
Mm.
And so if we're suppressing those, then we're going to not be looking after ourselves. And the result of that is going to be something along the lines of burnout.
Mm.
So when people say, oh, yeah, I feel emotions from time to time, we're experiencing at least one emotion at every moment of the day. I used to say every waking moment, but we have emotional responses when we're asleep, nightmares, dreams, right?
Mm.
We develop emotions. And the other thing about this emotions or feelings that we have, we don't have to be in the moment to experience them. If you've ever had an argument with somebody and then 6 hours later you go through the argument in your head again and you get angry again,
Mm.
we don't have to be in that moment. You can think about a really nice meal and our stomach juices will start to flow as if we were eating the
Mm.
meal itself.
Correct.
Uh,
Now I have saliva building in my mouth as you say that, because I did
just,
picture. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry I made you hungry. But what happens when you suppress that feeling is
Mm.
you're dissatisfied.
Mm.
And I believe the same thing is happening when we're experiencing sort of burnout.
Mm.
We're suppressing what's needed. If it's not work related burnout, maybe we can't say no to people. Again, we're back to
Mm.
boundaries. And so we become overloaded.
Mm.
We have other responsibilities outside of work. We've got special
Mm.
needs parents. We've got special needs
Mm.
children.
Mm.
We're procrastinators, which is actually an anxiety response,
Mm.
or we're perfectionists, again an anxiety
Yeah.
response. And if we're suppressing those feelings, we're going to burn out. So
Mm.
burnout isn't just a work related thing; it's around us as
Yeah.
well, and certain types of people experience it. So,
Mm.
but if we're doing that and not paying attention to what we're feeling inside, and
Mm.
tending to that,
Mm.
tending to the need rather than the emotion itself, um, we know what the end result is going to be: dissatisfaction, disquiet, disharmony, unfulfilled.
Mm.
Um, and now we're on a slippery slope towards burnout.
Mm. And how can we help someone that we might maybe see they are going into the path of burnout? Is it, but in fact, another question before. Is it easier to know whether we are going through burnout or to see someone else going through burnout? Are we better in identifying it within ourselves or
No.
someone else?
We will see burnout in somebody else far sooner than we'll see it in ourselves. Actually, let me rephrase that. We will
Mhm.
see burnout in other people far sooner than we will admit to seeing it in ourselves. I
Mm.
think there's a difference there. And, we're talking again about the self critic,
Mhm.
we were speaking about at the start of our conversation.
Yes.
Um, our self-critic won't allow us to recognize burnout, because to experience burnout in ourselves means we
Mm.
have to sort of admit that we're not coping as well as perhaps we thought we could. That's
Yes.
usually the response. And we
Mm.
give ourselves a hard time for not being able to keep up, or not being a team player, or letting the side down, or we'll make a story around what it is that's causing what we're feeling, but it's not burnout, because we will we find it very, very hard to admit that that's what's going on. And
Mm.
I think we find this here's a prime example where we will find this is in the health sector. Um, People who are enormously passionate about what they do. And in fact, it's a vocation, and they identify by their roles in the health
Mm.
sector. But there's an extra bit that from my experience of dealing with and working with people in that space.
Mhm.
If you or I were working in an organization and we were burnt out, we could just go, I've had it, I'm out of here. People in the health sector very often say, if I don't continue working, who's going to step into my shoes? So if not me,
Mm.
who? And I have spent my entire career becoming a specialist, just about all of my adult life,
Mm.
becoming a specialist in whatever it is I do in the health sector. And
Mm.
if I just walk away from this, who's there to fill my shoes? It's not easily done.
Mm.
spends 15 years developing the skills to be as good as who they need to be.
Mm.
Um, and if they walk away because they're burnt out, who's going to fill their shoes? And
Mm.
so it's much, much harder when we completely identify by that sort of, by, that's who we are now. And then that's actually an element of burnout, is that sort of what they call efficacy, which I think is an awful word for burnout. It's our ability to do our best work. Even the most passionate people
Mm.
find that sort of brain fog, and
Mm.
even though they're passionately engaged in what they're doing, they just can't do their best work anymore. It
Mm.
was my experience. I just forgot the names of people I worked with, even in my team. I
Mhm.
spoke to somebody the other day, and they were trying they were writing the word picnic, and they were spelling it Picknick. There's no K in picnic. And they were
No.
staring at it, and they were just going,
What's
it's not
wrong?
right.
Something's
I
wrong with
can't
my
tell,
patient.
I can't tell what's wrong. Other people deadlines, they can't do simple arithmetic, they cannot,
Mm. Yeah.
and stuff that should be easy for them to do, they can't do,
Yeah.
and stuff that's difficult takes way longer. And
And
so the
when
self,
it happens, some people will push even further because maybe
oh
of their
yeah,
self-critique. And then
yes,
how come I can't do it anymore? Rather than maybe take a step back and realizing that their speed is a bit lower, but that's fine. As again, self-compassion, it's common humanity. It can happen to everyone. And that's it.
yeah. And in actual fact, one of the first things I find, one of the first things to go when we're experiencing that level of burnout is some sense of play. The sense of connecting with other people, the sense of even doing our exercise. I'm too busy with work, I can't exercise.
Mm.
So we disconnect and disengage from other people, and we shrink in on ourselves
Mm.
because we're feeling bad that we can't keep up and we're letting everyone down. And when that sense of play, that sort of, you know, fun and engagement and connection with other people without any consequence, that's really what
Mm.
play is. When that starts to drift away, that's when we know we're heading down into a serious level of disharmony and potentially burnout. Yeah.
Mm.
So if you're noticing that's going and you've lost a variety in your life, that's not a
Mm.
good sign.
Yes.
But that creeps up on us so quickly. And so we'll see it in other people before we'll ever admit to seeing it in ourselves. It's a really interesting thing. And actually, the other thing I would say to our viewers and listeners, if you've experienced burnout before, you are more susceptible to experience it again. Uh,
Mm.
Actually, it's a bit like pneumonia and lung injuries. Um, if you're more susceptible to experiencing it again, it could happen sooner. But I think the flip side is you'll be much more aware of it next time,
Mm.
and
Indeed.
probably a bit more self-compassionate having gone through it once.
Mm. Yes. Thank you. And again, can you talk? I know it's really hard on this one, but how long to get out of burnout, or how long
Oh,
to?
how long to recover? I think it's how long were you in it, first of all, is going to be the part.
Mm.
If it's tackled soon enough, the flickering candle, then we can stop the breeze that's going to blow the candle out.
Mm.
If the candle's already blown out, then it's going to be a sort of a much slower process to get back in the game. Um, I would say take your time
Mm-hmm.
coming back from burnout, because sometimes people think if I take a week off or take a month off, I'll come back and I'll be fine.
Mm.
Generally not. Not if you're going to
No.
go
Yeah.
back into the same situation. If you're going back into the lion's den, then you're not, you won't have recovered sufficiently.
Mm.
Some kind of a change is needed. Some kind of a
Yes.
mindset shift is going to be needed.
Mm.
Um, there was during COVID, you might remember, big organizations. I probably shouldn't name any, just in case I get us into trouble. But big international organizations gave everybody a week off to recover from their burnout. I don't know if you
Mm.
recall that happening. There was a good number of them did it, and I remember at the time thinking, "What are you trying to achieve here?"
Mm.
People who aren't burned out got a week off, but then came back and realized that the budgets and the targets and everything that they were trying to achieve wasn't adjusted. They'd lost a week and now they were playing catch up to try and achieve the end of quarter, end of month, end of year
Mm.
results, right? So that didn't help. The people who were genuinely burnt out spent the week not resting and recovering in any way, but they spent the time trying to catch up
Mm.
and trying to spin to get back on top of things again, and then suddenly found that they were back in, but everybody had bigger targets to achieve now. So it was an absolute waste of time. And what it did say to me is that they didn't understand what burnout was actually about.
Yeah.
And very often, in fact, still, I suggest that the traditional definition of burnout has no mention of mental health in there at all. They talk about exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, um,
Mm-hmm.
tiredness. They talk about our ability to do our best work, and they talk about cynicism, which is
Mm.
the sort of third element, if you like. And yeah, actually, that it's more than that, I think. And but those are the three main sort of domains of
Yeah.
burnout. There's no mention of mental health in there
Mm.
anyway. And anyway,
Yeah.
cynicism is just a response. It's a coping skill or a coping strategy that we're using. Gossip in the workplace is what it looks like, and we're
Mm.
doing that gossiping because we're looking for something else to blame. Misery
Mm.
loves company, and what we're trying to do is find some. It can't be me. It's got to be something else. So we start sort of complaining and gossiping about the organization, the leaders, or
Mm.
workers, or clients. That's when it
Mm.
gets messy. But what that actually is us just looking for something to blame.
Mm.
I've worked in the addiction sort of recovery space for a good many years. And people who are in the early stages of recovery will relapse. It's a part of the process.
Mm.
And we never apportion blame on anybody. But again, the self-critics experiences shame because I relapsed and I drank or I took drugs or whatever. And
Mm.
and that means I've kind of failed, and there's a huge amount of shame related to it.
Mm.
And I would have people come to me and say, I've relapsed or I've slipped. And I would say, tell me what happened.
Mm.
And I will get 10 things that occurred that made them relapse. Now I know what's going on and I will be sympathetic to what they're saying, but really the message that needs to be delivered eventually is it's your responsibility. And all of those things that happened probably aren't, they're not really the blame for why you relapsed. But I don't pass judgment on people, etc. But what I'm saying, the reason I'm saying that is it's a bit like that sort of gossipy cynicism.
Mm.
It's what they're kind of going is, look, it's not me, it's all of these things that happened to me, and therefore I'm not, I'm trying not to make myself feel bad about it. It's the same thing
Mm.
with and cynicism. What's actually
Mm.
going on? Apathy. I've
Mm.
reached the line and I've just had too much and I give up. you know um
Mm.
and when we can admit to that, that's the best way to start our recovery from burnout, and recognize that it's had an effect on our mental well-being.
Mm.
The missing piece.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, Thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of people will think about it a bit more. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I hope
and
so. And let's
yeah.
normalize the conversation. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
every light bulb will blow. Every computer hard drive will fail if it's used long enough or put under enough pressure. It's a
Yeah.
bit like a violin string. If there's that sweet spot when it sounds
Mm.
beautiful and it's working perfectly. If
Mm.
there's not enough stress on it, it's useless. It's not doing anything. It's just lying there. Put too much on it and it will snap, just like we
Mm.
all have a breaking point. Every single one of us has. And
I
it
like
can,
your metaphors. Sorry.
uh,
I like it because in your book, Up Yours, I like the metaphor as well of the canary in the cage, in the cold mines.
but the
You want
canary
to
down the coal mine. Yes, yes, yes.
I
Yeah,
mean,
but it's true.
yeah.
And it might be a tired cliche. I don't know.
Mm.
But the interesting, when you unpack the canary in the coal mine sort of conversation, it's really interesting because For any listeners or viewers who don't know what the canary down the coal mine is, um, coal miners used to experience something down the coal mine that they couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't smell, couldn't taste, couldn't feel. Something was going on that could kill them,
Mm.
but it didn't trigger any of their senses. So they had no warning that this was going on. And so somebody said it's got to be a poisonous gas. And they worked out it's carbon monoxide. Now, they found that the best way to sort of figure out what the poison gas was, they needed something to give them a warning, a signal. And they tried various different animals, mice and cats and all sorts of things. But what they found is a canary is a bird that will sing incessantly in search of a mate, wherever it is. The male canary will sing incessantly. So even down a dark coal mine, it'll continue singing, looking for a mate. The other thing with canaries is that they actually take in oxygen when they're breathing out as well as when they're breathing in. So it's a double whammy of oxygen, and they breathe really, really quickly. So they were
Mm.
going to be very sensitive to changes in the oxygen level. So they found the perfect warning system. And so the canary would be down in the cage and the coal miners are working. If they notice that the canary isn't singing anymore, danger sign. They'll check in the canary. If it's lying at the bottom of the cage, there's gas. We got to get out of here. And so when they found that the workplace was unsafe, they stopped, left, and figured out what to do. No, they even have little oxygen tanks to help revive the canaries, and very
Oh,
often the canary did recover, and then bring it back down the coal mine the next day whenever the gas kind of dissipated again.
that was not in your book, was it? This part?
I don't know if I put a picture in it. I'm not sure. But
Oh, yeah.
the canary could recover anyway. But the point was, back then,
Mm.
when there was a danger in the workplace,
Mm-hmm.
everybody evacuated. And I use it as a metaphor today, and I say, what's in your workplace? It's not going to be carbon monoxide. God, I'd hope not. But what's
Yeah.
in your workplace that's causing the work and the team to collapse?
Mm.
So what's our warning sign? First of all, how do we know the canary isn't singing? And the
Yeah.
problem is, even when we do figure it out, we don't stop working. We just keep doing what we were doing, which is
Mm.
not a good thing. That's the first thing. And the second thing is what is the gas down the coal mine? And people usually say it's kind of stress or it's conflict. There'll be something sort of in that space.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the interesting thing. When I say, we don't react or respond as well today as they did 200 years ago, you with the canary. Coal miners had the technology to use other sort of systems, but still the canary was used up until the 1980s in some of the coal mines in the north of England, in Yorkshire. They just trusted that, the canary was better than any other system that we might have. Um,
Mm.
and I just love it. They trusted the canary over the sort of technology that they had. And I think there's something lovely about it, but there's also something that's a little bit sort of scary, if you like, that people
Yeah.
they didn't use the best of technology to just
Mm.
stuck with the canary. I think it was a beautiful idea. So that's what the story was. Yeah. So
Mm.
so what's the canary in your workplace? How do you know when
Mm.
all is not well? And do you pay any attention to it when you find it out? And
Mm.
what is the gas down your coal mine? It's a great analogy to get people to think about what it is in the workplace that's causing the
Mm.
trouble. Causing
Okay,
the
I know. Can I ask you a last question? Because I was curious about something.
Sure.
Um, so in your book, you talk about gratitude, and
Yeah.
I'm a strong believer in gratitude,
Yeah.
but I see it applied only in people' personal life. I don't
Sure.
see any workplaces really empowering people with the art of gratitude and understanding the benefits of gratitude. And
Yeah.
I was wondering why. I like, if like, as a change maker, like, I and that's the thing I was starting to work on, is like helping people and teams to work on their gratitude. But commercially speaking, it was a massive fail. No one cared about
Yeah,
embracing gratitude in the workplace. So
you
I'm
know,
just curious because you know the benefits to you. It's mentioned in your book.
sure.
It's science based. So
Yeah,
how come
yeah.
you don't do more gratitude in the workplace?
I think because
I mean, you know.
it comes under feedback is the first question, I think, is the first point. And sometimes
Mhm.
feedback, positive feedback
Yeah.
is not something we're very good at.
Mm.
We need to be better at because the benefits are enormous. Um,
Yes.
and it's not enough to say to somebody, you're doing a great job. Tell them why they're doing a great job.
Mm.
It's
Be
all about
specific.
connecting. Yeah. The other thing about gratitude is we can't be anxious and grateful at the same time. It's a very,
No.
very useful skill to actually,
Correct.
if we're in a highly anxious state, to
Mm.
think of something that we're grateful for. It just switches the brain around and it gives us an opportunity to sort of come
Yes.
from it. That's the second. The third
Yeah.
thing I would say about gratitude, um, and I worked with again with people in recovery from addiction who'd been
Mhm.
sort of long time, to be 12 months to 24 months in recovering in a treatment facility. One
Okay.
of the first things we would talk to people about was to develop this kind of attitude of gratitude,
Mm.
and not, you'll sometimes see gratitude journals that say name three things that you were very grateful for today and name five people that you're grateful for and tell them why
Mm.
and all that. That's a
Mm.
huge task. I used to start with we're going to run a gratitude program for everybody for 4 weeks, and I would invite anybody watching or listening here to try it as well. You only have to come up with one thing that you're grateful for, just one,
Mm.
and it's going to be easy for the first, yeah, just the one thing. It's going to be easy for the first few days because it's going to be your partner, your work, your life, your something like that.
Mm.
The deal is though that you cannot in the next 4 weeks repeat that thing you're grateful for again. So the first few days, the first 5 days, maybe the first week is going to be relatively easy, but you're going
Mm.
to have to start digging deep to think about what else you're grateful for in your life for the next sort of 3 weeks. But what it does do is it trains us to look for the positives, and it trains us to look for the things that mean something to us and we should value in our lives. And
Yes.
when you develop that, it doesn't take very long to develop that sort of mindset
Must. Yeah.
of looking for the positives in our lives and the reasons why we're positive around. So it's a great strategy. You just got to find one thing you're grateful for that you haven't used in the last previous few weeks. And believe me, if you try it, it's amazing to watch sort of how it sort of comes about. And I usually say to people, do it as last thing at night before you go to sleep, because
Mm.
it just sets you up into that
It's,
sort of mindset of a relaxing sleep.
mm.
Then people say to me, so, well, I'm going to segue a little bit here. I'm very often asked, how do you train people in emotional intelligence?
Mm.
And I think gratitude has to play a huge part in it because we need to have that mindset.
Mm.
A great strategy for developing um, that sort of empathy and sort of connection with other people, I say, is do something nice for somebody in the team or in the workplace.
Mm.
Pick one and do something nice once a week. Once a day
Mm.
would be lovely, but let's not say
Even put it in your calendar because most of the time, if it's not in your calendar, it's not happening. So
guilt to
say
death.
10 minutes gratitude, and then you have to execute on your 10 minutes of gratitude. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, I
but
had to jump in.
no, that's absolutely fine. That's a yeah. Make space for it. And make sure it happens. But my line is, do something nice for somebody, and it doesn't have to be financial. You don't have to go buy them,
Mm.
a muffin or something like that. But do
Mm.
something for somebody, but you cannot tell them that you've done it. It's got to be like a secret Santa
Yes.
every week, right?
Yes.
But if you start doing that, watch what happens for
Mm.
somebody who's received that sort of gratitude from you,
And you,
and what when you receive it,
no,
right?
even when you do it, it's been proven. When you give it,
Absolutely, absolutely.
assess how you feel as well.
Yeah,
because you
both
watch the
parties
reaction.
receive
Yeah.
that oxytocin and dopamine hits.
Mm,
Both parties, when we do something for somebody, both of us get something from it, you know.
mm,
And so if somebody wants to develop their emotional intelligence and emotional sort of skill set, empathy skill set, because everyone thinks, oh, you have to be born with it. Well, we are. Every single one of us is born with it. It's a survival instinct. It's
mm,
a survival skill. We need to know that we belong to our tribe. And the only way
mm,
we can do that is to be empathetic for the people around us.
mm,
And if we want to learn how to become a bit more emotionally aware and emotionally intelligent, doing something nice for somebody and not being allowed to let them know that you've done it is a kind of a very selfless act,
mm,
but it helps build our sort of awareness, and it helps build us our connection within our tribe as well.
mm.
We all have the skill. It's just a question of bringing it out. That's what it's about. Oops, sorry.
Yeah.
It's altruism. Siri just told me I should talk about altruism, but I don't think we have time, Siri. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Yes. So thank you. Do you want to leave the listeners, the viewers with something? I think
Um,
we did cover a lot already, but
I, I think we have. You put me on a spot now. I think, if anything, be gentle with ourselves. The time has come. We've been through a crazy few years. Most of our viewers and listeners will be in Australia. 4 years ago, we had fires, the like of which we'd never seen before. We've had 3 years of lockdowns and COVIDs and all of the uncertainty and the rupturing of society and sort of, splitting of connection and engagement with other people. And now apparently we're facing down a couple of years of drought and possibly fires again. So we're bouncing from one bloody catastrophe to the next. Let's not lose our human sort of capacity to sort of be there for each other.
Mm,
Develop some element of gratitude. Just be kind to ourselves.
mm,
This is, life sometimes is shit, and it's okay to say it is, and let's try and move on. And just
mm,
keep an eye out for each other. There's 8
mm.
billion of us here now. There's always somebody who could do with a friendly word. And sometimes that's us that could do with it as well, and learn from what younger generations are like. Their levels of politeness and kindness live on. Loneliness is a huge problem. Let's try and
Yes.
knock that on the head if we can.
Let's be aware of that, and let's
Yeah,
be active and
yeah.
knowing
Self-compassion and
that.
compassion for others. And if we can do
Mm,
that, we can beat anything, I reckon.
mm. Yes. That's skills for life, for change makers that want to be sustainable in their
That,
performance moving
that's it.
forward.
If we want to make change, we're going to have to be the ones that's going to start with us.
Yes.
And
Thank you, Mark.
thank you, Lisanne, for running this program for Thoughts for Change Makers. I applaud your initiative in setting it up and running it, and thank you for having me as one of your guests.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye, everybody.